Simon and Matt were best friends, and one summer day they were bored in the park, so they decided to go slogging apples. Not only were they going to just steal apples from a tree, but they were going to steal apples from a guy who had a reputation as a really mean guy. So mean that there were stories that he hung kids upside down from a rope and laughed as he held onto a lead of a vicious dog barking at them. Stories vary depending on who you were told by. Did he leave the dogs go or hold onto them? Some people say the stories are just silly yarns made up by people just because the guy is a bit eccentric. It was a beautiful summer's day when Simon and Matt snuck into the guy's garden, and they saw the beautiful red apples in the tree. They were just under the tree when they felt a shiver up their spine. The man was right behind them and shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" Then he started laughing and said, "Don't worry, I'm just joking. I have heard the stories about me, but don't worry, they're not true. I'm not some type of monster who throws people into a fire and watch them burn just because they steal a few apples. When I was your age, I did exactly the same thing." The boys smiled and were relieved. The man said to the boys, pointing to a window of his house, "You see that? Well, that is my passion, stained glass. If you like, I will bring you both out some apple juice, freshly squeezed from that apple tree, and then I will give you a quick lesson on how to make stained glass." The two boys were still wary of the guy, but didn't want to seem ungrateful, so accepted the offer. A few minutes later, the man said, "Okay, on the count of 3, let's take a gulp to celebrate a beautiful summer's day." The two boys drank and began to feel like they were choking. They felt sick as blood poured down their mouth, and eventually they learned that the glass was in the apple juice. When the glass came out of their mouth, it was stained in blood. The man said with a sinister smile as he looked at the broken glass that was chewed by the boys unwillingly. Now that's one way to make stained glass. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content. White walls all around. It almost looked like a hospital. It was clean. White tiles, white sink, white walls, and the roof was white. Since the earliest of times, white has been associated with purity and innocence. Then again, asylums are generally white, and they reflect the exact opposite of purity and innocence. Instead, those white walls hold the mentally insane, those that are not of sound mind and are a danger to themselves and others. The irony of the contrast between the two varying white rooms is ludicrous. He looked into the mirror. Deep brown eyes gazed back at him. The freckles surrounding his nose looked as though God himself spread flakes on his face to create him. His brown hair sat atop his head, unkempt. He scratched his head to cure a sudden itch and continued to stare at himself. His reflection stared back, unmoving. He opened the faucet and let the cold stream of water pour into the sink. After a moment, he cupped his hands beneath the water and scooped what he salvaged in his hands onto his face. Some of the water splashed onto the floor. He didn't seem to notice. He stood there for a moment more, face dripping with water, still staring into the mirror. What he saw disgusted him, and he washed his face once more, almost as if he was trying to wash his very skin off in the hope something more appealing lay beneath the first layer. He opened the medicine cabinet and slowly extracted a small box. He set the box on the sink and opened it. He removed a single shiny razor and placed it beside the box. He returned the box from whence it came and picked up the razor once more. He turned it in his hands thoughtfully, not diverting his gaze from the mirror. Razor in hand, he rolled up the sleeve of his long-sleeved black shirt that he had worn to both parents' funerals. The thought crossed him that both his parents had since departed this world, but not a single hint of emotion prevailed from this morbid thought. He glanced at his now exposed wrist and back to the razor. The moment the blade touched his skin, he drew in a quick, sharp breath. The icy feel of the metal made him hesitate for a moment. The razor shimmered in the artificial lighting of the fluorescent light bulb hanging directly above him. He put the blade down and sat on the end of the bathtub, head in hands and breathing deeply. He glanced at the weapon of self-harm and then at his wrists. Then back to the sharp, unforgiving steel he had placed on the edge of the sink. He wondered how it would feel to cut so deep the blood poured out of his sliced wrist, to see his blood spill and cover everything around him. The thought of blood made him smile slightly, ever so slightly. It was but merely a wisp of a smile, if even that. He liked blood. The thought of blood made him think of the time he took the life of a stray cat he had lured into his home, how it had purred contentedly while he had petted and stroked it, followed by the hiss of terror it let loose when he squeezed and bit into one of its ears, bit so hard he felt the cartilage crunch under the pressure of his teeth, but not before his teeth had ripped into the skin. The blood that spewed from the missing cartilage crunch under the pressure of his teeth, but not before his teeth had ripped into the skin. The blood that spewed from the missing appendage had excited him, and he laughed ever so sweetly at the sight of the feline's ear he had spat on the floor. The sounds the cat made were otherworldly, and one can only imagine the pain it was in after having an ear forcibly removed. He held onto it tightly, so tight it had become so breathless the sounds of agony had simply faded into desperate attempts to draw even breath to sustain its miserable life. Still chuckling softly to himself, now covered in the blood of the cat, he reached into his pocket and brought out the Swiss Army knife he'd accumulated through less than desirable means. He looked at the blade after opening it, marvelling at the craftsmanship behind making such a beautiful, smooth and sharp blade. His thoughts made their way back to the cat, and he turned the cat onto its back, lifting its head to expose the throat. With a slow, precise movement he had practiced in his head, he drew the blade deep and across the exposed neck of the cat. He sliced deep, but not deep enough to sever the head. All sounds and movements the cat had been capable of carrying out ceased immediately the moment the knife penetrated and severed the blood transport systems. The blood that resulted brought a magnificent and eerily beautiful smile to the boy's face. The blood sprayed him and the surrounding vicinity, but that did not faze him. Instead, he hoisted the cat up and shook it violently in an effort to see just how much blood he could extract from the deceased animal. That was but the first of many animals that met their end at the hands of the sadist. He picked the blade up again, a glimmer of excitement in his eye as he pressed it to his wrist, He shuddered as the cold steel touched him, just as he had done to that cat. He pressed deep and hard and drew the razor in a swift upward motion. The cut was thin, as he was using a new sharp razor, but the pain was intense. He felt as though someone had set fire to his wrist. The blood was little at first, and came out slowly, but as he set the razor down, he noticed the floor beneath him was covered in blood. His hand could not be seen beneath the blanket of red that now covered it. The blood would not stop pouring forth from his self-inflicted wound. He had cut too deep. He knew something was wrong the moment he set the razor down. With each bit of blood that escaped his body, it seemed to take with it an incredible amount of his energy. He slumped into the bathtub, blood beginning to puddle in it. His eyes fluttered open after having closed for a stint of time. He tried to raise his hand, but found he could not. Blood was all he could see now. It was everywhere. The bathtub seemed to be filling with it as it continued to pour from his wrist. He couldn't seem to keep his eyes open. They closed. He tried to open them, but found he could not. He could feel the darkness beginning to take him. He wanted to fight it, but his life force had been sapped with the immense outflow of blood. He decided the best thing to do would be to accept it. Eyes closed, he tilted his head back, and did not even feel it hit the porcelain tub with the force it did. He couldn't feel anything now. It began to almost feel euphoric. He felt disembodied. Nothing mattered. All that existed was the darkness. He wanted the darkness, and the darkness wanted him. It needed him. The darkness took him, and he went, with a smile on his face. He liked blood. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content. Paisley was walking through the woods, afraid because she was alone. She felt cold and tired and hungry and just wanted to get home. She kept thinking she heard something, but each time it was nothing. She felt like her imagination was running wild. The air got colder and she kept walking, listening to see could she hear anything. She wondered, was she alone in these woods? She took a rest. She was tired of walking, but she knew she just wanted to get home, so she didn't rest for long before she began to walk again. Suddenly she heard something this time. She stayed quiet, hoping that whoever it was, or whatever it was, wouldn't hear her or see her. Once again, it turned out to be nothing. She sat down. She was so tired and wished she was at home in her bed cozy. As she sat down, she listened every time she heard anything, even a bird chirp. She listened intently. She thought someone else was there with her. She could feel it. Suddenly, as she got up, she froze. She knew this time. She wasn't imagining anything. There was a man walking. He was real because she could see him right in front of her, but thankfully he couldn't see her. She froze, hoping he wouldn't see her. He was just about to pass the tree she was hiding behind. As soon as he passed, she jumped out and bit his neck, tasting his blood, and thankful she had her taste of blood tonight. Now finally, she can go home. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content.